Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are very pleased and honored to have with us today Rabbi Yaakov Menken. Rabbi Menken is the founding and current managing director of the Coalition for Jewish Values, which represents over 2,500 traditional Orthodox rabbis in the American public policy space. Rabbi Menken's writings have appeared in Fox News, Newsweek, the Federalist, Jerusalem Post, and many, many other media outlets. Rabbi Menken is also the founding director of Project Genesis and the operator of Torah.org. Additionally, Rabbi Menken is co-founder and editor of Cross Currents, an online Jewish journal of Orthodox Jewish thought and opinion, and the author of the Everything Torah Book, an introduction to basic Judaism and Torah thought. Rabbi Menken, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it very much.
And thank you for having me.
Just to get started, what is the Coalition for Jewish Values, and what is meant by authentic Jewish values?
To answer your second question first, authentic Jewish values are something that that come to us directly from 3,000 years of Torah, that lead us in a particular direction, things which are being debated in the public policy sphere as if they were debatable constructs. To just take one example, how many genders are there? Suddenly there's a debate about that, and whether you can change which gender you are. The Torah has a very emphatic answer to that, such that no scholar of traditional Jewish thought can be ambiguous on that issue. So to now move to your first question, what is Coalition for Jewish Values? Our job is simply to articulate those genuine, authentic Jewish policy positions that come to us from Torah, that do affect American public policy, especially in these areas where we see people claiming to speak for Jewish thought or Jewish opinion, are claiming that their personal views are those of Jewish values. And of course, we know the very opposite is true. It is not up to any of us to determine what Jewish values are. They are part of something that which is given to us through the Torah. It is our job merely to articulate what those are. And thus, the people who are claiming to speak for the Jews are actually, when they say their own personal opinions, they're creating a Chillul Hashem, they're desecrating God's name, they're creating a chasm between tradition-minded people who are not Jewish and the Jewish community. They're damaging support for Israel. So there's a host of ways in which we find that there needed to be this voice from within the Jewish community, from within the observant community, saying, oh no, understand, these are where the real Jewish values are, and it's not up to us.
And what are some of the major issues, the ones on the front burner that the coalition is dealing with today, and how are you dealing with this?
Well, very sadly, of course, the issue of anti-Semitism is a big issue right now. Of course, support for Israel around the world. It's interesting that what is in the Jewish community, when we talk about an anti-Zionist, the Satmar groups, for example, they are, in actual practical terms, robustly pro-Israel. They invest in Israel, they do business with Israel, they travel to Israel, and of course they recognize that all the opposition to Israel is because it is a Jewish country. Is it rooted in anti-Semitism? So obviously, that's an issue that we handle. Officially or formally, we would handle any issue where you have a consensus among rabbis because the Torah tells us to go a particular way. And obviously, I mean traditionally educated, traditionally observant, genuine rabbis, not those who call themselves rabbis on the left, but rather, the real deal, as it were, those of us who learn and get our values from that place. So obviously, the issue of abortion has sadly become an issue over time. As I mentioned, how many genders there are. men in women's sports, which obviously leads, of course, to men in women's private spaces, which is completely antithetical to Torah thought. Issues like human rights and civil liberties, especially religious rights. We have found ourselves defending other religious groups because if we don't, we in America, as Orthodox Jews, will lose our rights too in the same situations. So we have to defend these other religious groups. So within the broad framework, we say human rights, religious liberty, and family values is our portfolio. But I've just given you some examples of the various issues and where they fall within that spectrum.
So what are some of the activities the coalition currently engaged in as it relates to anti-Semitism? Obviously, since October 7th, from Simplest Torah, there's been college campuses, other acts of anti-Semitism. What specifically is the coalition doing that might differ from other Jewish organizations in this space?
What differentiates us from other Jewish organizations is we're very outspoken on things that don't affect our community directly, but yet we are speaking from a place of Torah values. For the most part, the existing organizations, you can think about yourself, how vocal they are and what space they can find themselves. The Orthodox organizations, which do a phenomenal job of advocating for the needs of our community, will not focus overly much on what's going on college campuses because they don't, we don't send our kids to four-year residential colleges by and large. So there's that. And then there's the leftist groups, which don't speak from a place of Torah Judaism. And it's amazing, you go back to the late 19th century, and the Netziv said that modern day academics in his day were amazed trying to explain anti-Semitism because it just doesn't make sense. It's very difficult to develop a logical structure. So, the ADL, back when it was doing great work, developed a series of 11 tropes. And they said the person who believes the majority of those tropes is an anti-Semite. We look to the stories of Lavan and Pharaoh and Haman, and then we know what anti-Semitism looks like. And that obviously, again, differentiates. So anti-Semitism being a huge part of our day, like you said, since October 7th, because of who we are, because we have this general pro-values outlook. It happens to be, true story, when Speaker Johnson was just Representative Johnson attending a meeting of the Values Action Team, I handed him a copy of an article that I had written on how progressives are inflaming anti-Semitism. And that was literally 3 weeks before October 7th. So, now these moved to the Speaker's office. We still have a relationship with him. We have a relationship with the coalition's people in the Speaker's office, the Majority Leader's office, the Majority Whip's office, several committees. On the 23rd of May, probably by the time this podcast comes out, there's going to have been another hearing of the Committee on the Education and the Workforce, chaired by Virginia Fox. And that committee is going to be speaking with the leaders of UCLA, Northwestern, and Rutgers, because all three now buckled to these anti-Semitic protests. We have submitted lines of questioning not only to the two people handling the anti-Semitism issue for her, but to those in three independent congressional offices concerning congressmen and congresswomen who sit on that committee. So that's the type of work that we find ourselves doing that, it's practically behind the scenes in that I get to tell you about it. And you notice that I didn't name the congressman or anything like that, but just said, here's the type of influence that we're having in the real world. And that developed from the fact that we started from a pro-values place first, because I can tell you all of those three members of Congress are ones who support other things that we support, other things that we are aligned on. And that's where our relationships actually began.
Certainly, American politics has witnessed, has become very divisive. Parties and people on the fringes of both parties, and very hard to bring people together in a bipartisan way. Is there a danger on certain issues by focusing on conservative traditional values of losing bipartisan support, especially for Israel, but also on other Jewish-related issues?
Well, this is why organizations like the Aguda and the OU will not be as outspoken as we are, precisely for the phenomenon you just described, that they would lose alliances that they are able to build, especially think about the New York State Assembly and how transactional state assemblies can be, especially in the Northeast, where it's all about the horse trading and the deals you're going to make. But if you walk in and this person has a very different attitude than you do on same gender relationships, for example, and that's not going to directly impact the needs of our community. So those organizations stay out of that fight. The problem is that meanwhile, the leftist organizations, which don't have any such compunctions, and they have no actual independent needs, maybe they share the need for synagogue security, but by and large, what they want, or is anybody on the left wants. So they don't have any compunctions about speaking out, and they claim to represent the Jews, creating this Chil Hashem, actually damaging relationships. So it's actually very important that there be an organization that articulates what we really believe in, because, look, obviously there are those folks who have the right position on Israel above other issues. John Fetterman, Richie Torres. These are folks that, we will certainly compliment what they say about Israel. And it obviously shows that we're coming from a genuine place, because that's not partisan. A partisan organization wouldn't be doing the same thing. It's unfortunate we find ourselves in a circumstance where we are called partisan for having the same values we had for 3,300 years. We have this very straight history, and we're not changing what our values are and what we support. But on the contrary, you have a political party in existence in America today that calls its own leaders of 40 years ago bigots and hateful for believing the same thing the Jewish tradition has always believed. For example, that human life, even in the womb, has value, and that marriage is between a man and a woman. So, this is the situation we find ourselves. It's actually more dangerous that nobody be articulating this, because it confuses Israel's biggest allies in America. It confuses the people who are supportive of us and want to have a Jewish community in America. It's not difficult to see, unfortunately, that the leftists in America would be very happy to get rid of the Orthodox Jewish community in America. They'd have us move. It's like, go back to Israel, go back to Poland. We've been hearing that for a long time, that anti-Semitic school of thought. It's very important for us to develop alliances where we are.
Is there support for the coalition beyond the Orthodox community among non-Orthodox traditional Jews who have traditional values?
Actually, we have support even outside the Jewish community from people who uphold traditional values and recognize the potency of a Jewish organization, how much more we add to the dialogue. Note that the Jewish left in particular likes to claim that the Jewish position is radically different, and therefore, if you support the pro-values position, you're supporting Christianity over Judaism. So that is a Chil Hashem, which is tremendously damaging to us and to our actual values and to American civilization writ large. So The answer to your question simply is yes. Not only outside the Jewish community, but as you said, inside the Jewish community, people who are not Orthodox. In fact, there's a really significant population of non-Orthodox Jewish conservatives who have their heads straight on Jewish values, who recognize, the Sheldon Adelsons of the world, who recognize that, or Bernie Marcus of Home Depot. I was not using one particular example, but obviously there's people who are much less wealthy than that who also have conservative values, but are not traditional, not observant, but recognize, and they find themselves pushed out of their temples as a result. Today, Chabad has become almost the de facto welcoming place for a Jew who wants to do something Jewish, explore Judaism, etc., all over the country where they used to go to reform or conservative temples. Because at Chabad, it doesn't matter what your political views are. The rabbi is not going to talk about it either way. Whereas in Reform temples, they have no Torah to talk about. So what do they talk about? Their leftist politics, and under the rubric of tikkun olam, fixing the world, whatever they personally believe to be the right thing is tikkun olam, and therefore it's the ultimate Jewish value. Sad, but that's the situation we find ourselves.
Right. And is the support outside of the Jewish community coming primarily from evangelical Christians, or is it also beyond the evangelical communities?
Evangelical is the biggest demographic of those who share our values. But today's Catholics are very supportive. Today's non-Christians, we actually have Muslims who are very supportive of what we're doing, obviously, and allied on many things. We've sadly, since October 7th, we've divested ourselves of certain relationships, let's put it that way, because there were certain people who demonstrated that they were really not the allies of values that they claimed to be. But all the things that we worked together on were completely above board and authentic Jewish values and things that pushed America in the right direction. So we're happy and proud of what we did. We recognize, obviously that, if they're going to support Hamas, they're not going to support us. So there you are. But as far as who then our allies are, there's obviously a large community of non-evangelicals as well in America that support values and therefore support what we're doing.
Jewish advocacy groups such as the ADL, B'nai B'rith, ADL I believe was an offshoot of the B'nai B'rith, have been around for over 100 years. What's the history of the coalition, and where do you think it fits in the history of Jewish advocacy groups in the United States?
First of all, we've only been around for 7 years. So we are relatively still the newcomers on the block, very much a smaller organization. It is interesting that the ADL already takes our presence very seriously. And that it is impactful in terms of, that Jonathan Greenblatt himself is aware that there's an organization that will criticize him when he goes off course on anti-Semitism. To take a recent example, and then this will kind of tell you, where we fit and how valuable we are. There's a particular lawyer in New Jersey named Adil Manji. He is a Muslim. He's an American Muslim. That's not the problem. The Biden administration appointed him for a seat on a federal bench, which is a lifetime appointment. For the rest of his life, until his retirement, he'd be pulling a salary, a generous salary, from the federal government and deciding federal appeals cases. Very significant position to be in. I mean, those on the federal appeals circuits who are usually the ones drawn up to the Supreme Court. This particular individual was a very generous supporter of an anti-Semitic center at Rutgers University. I'm not exaggerating by calling it anti-Semitic. The things that they said before and after October 7th, the Jewish Federation of Metro West in New Jersey criticized that center So it's not coming from a place, the Jewish right, as it were. Everybody in the Jewish community recognizes this is a dangerous center. He was a generous supporter. He got his corporation, the law firm that he works for, to make a generous gift as well. Total around $20,000 steered to this anti-Semitic center at Rutgers, through his generosity. Under questioning in the Senate, because the Senate is what vets new candidates for the federal bench, Republicans in particular focused on his affiliation with that center. He claimed to have no knowledge of its activities. They came up with examples where he'd actually sat and made presentations together with anti-Semitic presenters in other forums related to this organization and related to the conferences that it sponsors and attends. So it was all completely above board. The ADL, and for that matter, the AJC, the American Jewish Committee, both criticized the Republican senators and said their lines of questioning appeared to be motivated by bias. They handed the Biden administration a talking point, claiming that the Republican senators were asking about his affiliation with a terror-supporting hate group were biased against his Muslim faith. Completely outrageous. Coalition for Jewish Values was the only organization that not only stood up for the Republican senators, backed their lines of questioning, said this fellow, Adil Manji, is dangerous, and also criticized the ADL and AJC for reversing what the ADL's historic purpose is to defend Jews, using a false charge of Islamophobia to defend somebody affiliated with an organization that hates Jews is the complete opposite of what the ADL is supposed to be doing. And I can tell you it was impactful because Senator McConnell quoted us. Press releases from the senators quoted us. We made some big alliances in that it was a Senate Judiciary Committee because there was no other organization until CJV that was going to talk. We have filled a critically needed void. You certainly we're not going to get an organization like the Aguda or the OU. And again, I have nothing but praise for the work that they do and how they focus on their lane, and they do it very, very well. But because they do that, they would never get involved in a fight like this. There was literally nobody else to do this. And somebody had to stand up. I mean, these were senators who love us, like Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, who needed defending at that moment, deserved defending at that point because they certainly had not done anything hateful towards any group. And the ADL was getting it wrong.
The efforts under the banner of Jewish values and bringing that out to the general public, which is what you're doing beyond the Jewish community, Orthodox community, where does that stem from? Is that part of the Jewish mandate to introduce Noahide laws to the world, the laws of general morality? What's the source that you're using, that you derive from on these efforts to emphasize authentic Jewish values?
Well, the Noahide laws are a good example of that, but I wouldn't limit it to those because there's a fellow, actually there's a rabbi named Ken Spiro of Aish Torah who wrote a book called World Perfect. In that book was built on a survey conducted with people around the world, identifying the key values of a first world civilization. What is it that makes a country, a free country in which people desire to live, where economies flourish, where people grow and develop? And he then demonstrates that all those 6 values come from Torah and do not come from the Greeks, the Romans, the Visigoths, the Vikings, all of the other architects that you would have considered the forerunners of sophisticated first world European civilization, American democracy, democracies in the West, etc. Those values are things like respect for human life, holding human life to be sacred, valuing peace over warfare, having universal justice, universal education, social responsibility. All of these things come out of Torah. All of these things are our values. And so the idea that, what's going on in America right now is you have a very vocal left that is trying to drag America away from those traditional values. By the way, number 6 on his list of 6 was family. The idea that there's a value of having a family and growing a family and having children being one of the most important things, all of that, of course, emerges from Jewish thought. And he actually demonstrated how in other cultures, they actually left babies to die. It wasn't just a matter of abortion being permitted. They permitted feticide. And so all of these values that you get from Torah are what drags a civilization to be a first world civilization where all cultures are valued and everybody's appreciated and kumbaya, et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line is, if you want to create an environment where it's still going to be good for Orthodox Jews to live and for everybody else, you're going to follow those values articulated by the founding fathers and not what's been, the progressive agenda seems to be to tear down the values of the founding fathers, that there shouldn't be universal justice. We all of a sudden, they're honoring warfare and honoring terrorism. That's a problem. That's not just a problem for Jews. It's a problem for everybody else, but it's certainly it's not too far to say that American civilization is at stake here, because any first world civilization is a first world civilization based on how closely it adheres to Torah values, which were given to us thousands of years ago.
As you just articulated, and as you view the alarming rise of anti-Semitism, what's going on the college campuses, what is your prognosis? Are you optimistic, pessimistic about the place of American Jewry in the United States of America?
Well, for people who don't see the parallels to the 1930s, see the parallels to the 1930s. There is a very serious problem going on right now. This is not something that will be solved overnight. There is an entirely false narrative regarding the Middle East. There's an organization called Students for Justice in Palestine that honors nobody except terrorists, murderers, and spreaders of classic anti-Semitic tropes. That's the purpose of this organization, and it claims to be a human and civil rights organization, and it's on over 150 U.S. college campuses. That is a huge problem. That is damaging American civilization. Right there, it is certainly damaging the likelihood of Jewish life continuing in America. You've got universities teaching courses on the Israel-Palestine conflict for the last century, which, of course, erases the involvement of the Arab League countries in order to invert who is the aggressor and who is the victim. If you look at the actual history of the Middle East over the last century, it has very, very little to do with anything called Palestine, and an awful lot more to do with places called Jordan and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia, of course. So why is it that all of these things are being passed off on American college campuses? Because nobody has stood up against it. Nobody has said, wait a minute, this is bigotry. So is there hope? Yes. The reason why this is not like the 1930s is in the 1930s, the Jews had no allies. The very organizations that the Jewish left has demonized and pushed away. We have a large subgroup of the Jewish community in America that is being called October 8th Jews. These are the folks who were members of progressive communities and always thought that progressives were their friends. And they woke up on October 8th and realized exactly how alone they were. Progressives were not their friends. They hated the Jewish community. They hated Jewish lives, especially in the Middle East. And they were supporting terrorism, blaming, I don't know if you remember this, but Harvard University, a collection of 30 different student organizations said, we blame the Israeli regime for all of the violence taking place in the region, while the victims of the Hamas massacre, their bodies were not yet cold. I mean, that's what we're talking about. These were completely off the rails, completely racist. But look at what's going on in Congress. Congress is now talking about denying Harvard any sort of campus funding because they won't protect their Jewish students. Columbia is going to lose funding. Now they have these other three colleges, Rutgers, UCLA, Northwestern, being raked over the coals for making a compromise with these anti-Semites. So obviously, we have a lot of allies. The overwhelming majority of both parties in Congress sides with Israel. Unfortunately, it's that vocal minority that's creating all of this trouble. And the biggest thing that I say to Christian communities is remember that, this is not a Jewish problem. This is an American problem. Look around the world at the places where Christians are experiencing the worst persecution. Those are places that already have no Jews. When they have Jews, they go after Jews first, then they go after Christians. So enlightened self-interest demands that they take anti-Semitism very, very seriously. And I will tell you they are. That we find ourselves with allies in the communities of various Christian organizations, various conservative organizations, stepping forward. And again, they could do very little without a Jewish ally, which is another reason why our presence is so critical. We enable groups like Heritage Foundation and FRC to do work on behalf of the Jewish community.
In conclusion, Rabbi Menken, what is the message you would give to the Orthodox community, to individuals? What should they be doing as individuals? Those people who can't lead organization, that they're not going to go into Congress, whatever. What should they be doing today to support these efforts?
Well, there has to be a certain level of mobilization. People who are reading the news and are familiar with the news should be reading our weekly bulletin on what's going on and get an understanding of the way that the Orthodox voice really does and can have a profound impact on public policy. We are now in the process of starting state chapters because state legislatures are where a lot of this stuff is debated. Our first state chapter was in Missouri, which is a state. It's a very conservative state, what they call a red state, or supporting Republicans, because it supports conservative and traditional values. And yet the only voice they had representing the Jewish community was a Jewish Community Relations Council headed by a woman who was more interested in talking about trans issues than supporting Israel. Now, obviously, that was very disconcerting to them. We've had a profound impact. Just our chapter there is barely a year old. Maybe I'm coming to a year and a half now. Profound impact on how the Missouri legislature interacts with the Jewish community and how it views the Jewish community. Again, we're going right to the top, as it were, by looking at state legislatures and, of course, the federal government, going to Congress. It's very interesting. As you might expect, the Trump administration was very interested in talking to us. The Biden administration, not so much. That has led to some, sad, almost tragic, the national strategy on combating anti-Semitism, which elevated CARE and elevated an anti-Semitic definition of anti-Semitism. They didn't talk to groups who were willing to vocally call out anti-Semitism on the left, and that led to bad results. So the Jewish community to your question, the Orthodox community needs to realize how important it is that there is this voice, that they are reading about us, they're seeing what we say, and of course, helping us to expand, helping us to provide the resources. You don't have to be an activist yourself to consider this a community obligation, the same way you support your other communal organizations, your schools and the synagogues and the Guda or OU, wherever your alliance lies. This is another cause where the support that we get from the broader Orthodox community only expands our voice. The fact that we can walk into Congress and say, we are supported by, when that number reaches, when it is accurate to say that we have 20,000 to 30,000 supporters in the traditional Orthodox community, we're going to be taken that much more seriously than we are now.
Rabbi Menken, we can go on, and our time is up. And again, thank you so much for your presentation and enlightening us about the organization and the state of American Jewry today. Thank you so much. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you again for this opportunity.